There are three things that you need to know about the Sony FX6 before you purchase this camera, and we're going to talk about it. So I recently just bought a Sony FX6 and I have been loving it. It's an amazing camera, a great purchase. I don't regret selling the Sony a7S III. I'm overall happy with it, but there is some things that I have found out when using this camera that just irritate my soul and just don't make any sense. And honestly, I didn't know that these were going to be an issue until actually using the camera. But all in all, despite these three things that I don't like so far, I still love this camera. It's an amazing camera. Don't get it twisted. But no camera is perfect, so we're going to talk about the imperfections. So honestly, big issue number one for me that I honestly did not know about, and you probably paid attention to it in the last video I posted, but it's the dual base ISO on the FX6. Now the FX6 claims to have a dual base ISO of 800 and 12,800, just like the Sony a7S III. But the Sony a7S III dual base ISO was 640 to 12,800. Now a big difference that I noticed with the a7S III and the FX6 is the dual base ISO. Now on the a7S III, it is a true dual base ISO. When you crank it up to 12,800, it is truly cleaning up that image. But with the FX6, yeah, it cleans up the image, but not like the a7S III does, from my knowledge and from what I experienced. So now with the FX6, the ISO 800, which is the first base ISO which Sony wants you to record in, that one is a fairly clear image. It's fairly clear, there's not that much noise in it. You won't really get lost in the shadows or the highlights if you expose properly. Now 12,800, that's where you'll start to see a little bit more noise. Now it's not ridiculously bad, but if you don't properly expose it, actually if you don't overexpose it, it's gonna look really bad. You're gonna see a lot of noise in it, and if you haven't watched my last video, if you paid attention to it, you can see in my shadows there's a lot of noise. I didn't realize that until after I got into post-production. But don't be afraid. There's three solutions that I found to work to help the noisy footage on the FX6. So tip number one would be to get a lens that has a low f-stop, whether it be at f1.8, f1.2, or f1.4. If you're gonna allow more light into your sensor when shooting at 12,800 ISO, you're going to be able to get a much more cleaner image because you're allowing more light into the sensor. Therefore, you're not going to have that much noise in your shadows. But now, this is where the most frustrating part comes in with the FX6 that I did not know. If you don't know, the FX6 shoots in Sony Cine EI, which is Sony's cinema line recording codec. All the cinema line cameras have that. The a7S III did not have that. Now though, with Sony Cine EI, you're only able to record in two ISOs, which are the two base ISO, 800 and 12,800. So therefore, you get no other options. But this is the thing that I did not know. If you're in Cine EI and you're at 12,800 and you don't have a properly lit set, and you try to either add more light, so increase the ISO or even decrease the ISO, on your monitor, it's gonna show that the ISO is either increasing or decreasing, but it's not affecting your actual image. So it's only affecting the image on the monitor. So if you have an external monitor, you're gonna see that it's not changing the ISO at all, like how you see it on your FX6 monitor. For me, it was a rookie mistake. I didn't know that because this is my first time ever using Sony Cine EI, so I had no idea. So just keep that into remembrance when you're changing your monitor, adding more ISO to it or decreasing it. You're not really doing anything to the actual image, you're just changing your monitor's image. But again, there are three ways that I've found to solve noisy footage on the FX6. Now the second thing that I found, which I don't really recommend, I honestly think that you should try to get it right on set rather than try to get it right in post, but you know, add noise reduction. Now the third thing, if you don't have noise reduction for any reason, or you're not able to get a hold of a prime lens, f1.4, 8, or 2, then the third option is gonna have to be you have to light the scene properly. That's the only way you're gonna get rid of that noise. You're gonna need to add more light to your sensor. If you have no available light, you gotta figure out what you can do. Now, I'm pretty sure there's probably more ways to fix noisy footage on the FX6, but those are just the three ways that I found that have been helping me so far with the FX6 in my post-production process. So now, if you have a lens that has a low f-stop, what you wanna do is overexpose it by 2 stops. When doing that, you can go in post-production and lower the exposure, and you're gonna save a lot of your shadows and highlights in post-production. So just like my Sony a7S III, I would always have to overexpose by 2 stops to get a cleaner image. Same with the FX6. Now, issue number 2 is gonna be that you lose autofocus in some frame rates. So for a perfect example, if you wanna shoot in, I don't know, 48 frames per second in S&Q mode, you're gonna lose autofocus, which is a shame because you're spending $6,000 on a camera. I want to have autofocus, especially for the Sony lineup when they're known to have really good autofocus. Now, it's not the end of the world because I can get away with manually focusing, but if I'm a one-man band, I got a project and I just want to use autofocus, it's nice to have. Now I do know that Sony's base frame rates have to be divided by something, but I'm not really too sure about that, but that's the reason why you lose the autofocus. Now my third and final issue also ties in with the frame rates, and it's that you lose audio when recording in 120 frames per second. Now if you didn't know, if you record in 59 frames per second, you can still have audio, because that's what I'm recording in now, which probably is no need for me to be recording in 59 frames per second, but whatever. And honestly, anything shot in S&Q mode, you just can't record audio. But a really cool thing about this camera is it does shoot in 240 frames per second. Now, if you haven't shot in 240 frames per second, it's really cool seeing it slow-mo. It's cool that the camera has that. I don't always use it, but it's nice knowing that it has it. But again, it's nice that it has it, but there's a drawback. You can only record in 1080p when shooting at 240 frames per second. So there you go. Those are 3 things that have been annoying me with the Sony FX6, but honestly, it's not the end of the world. I can work around those issues, but it's just some things that I figure you guys as my audience might want to know when purchasing an FX6. If you like today's video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Without further ado, abiantu, buongiorno.